mother, this is apparently not something she would do. So, my mom and dad could kind of abuse Lynn sometimes as a babysitter, which me and Ian absolutely loved, because she was the best babysitter ever. And one of the things that we got up to while Lynn was babysitting is she'd come and she'd hang out in the house with us. I think this time Mom and Dad were down in St. Martin's. Is that right? Yeah, St. Martin's. And so we always had this idea that we needed to have a romantic dinner. So we went around the house, and Annika's been trying to convince Lynn to do this now. We gathered up literally every candle in the house, lit all of them, took up probably half the dining room table, and we lit all the candles, and we ate dinner that way that night. Turned off all the lights in the house, and then we even probably closed the curtains to make sure it was darker. And looking back now, Lynn still won't let Annika do this next. Now she's a mother. She's appreciated. There's a few too many fire hazards in that. But we certainly enjoyed it, and I think we're both glad we had that candle experience. I still remember it. The entire table of love.
She still does insist on having candles at dinner.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, how sweet.
Just like this one.
Gee, that's so nice.
Sorry, that's the end of the story.
Mr. Pilcher, you must have a story or two.
Story or two?
Or 20.
50 years worth.
The name was born.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
At any rate, when I met Ruth as an RN, she trained at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. And I don't know how quite she got down to New York, but she did get down to New York. And I think Reinhold Niebuhr had a stroke, and I think she was actually nursing Reinhold Niebuhr in Union Seminary when he was getting over his stroke. Now, Reinhold Niebuhr, to you people who are uninformed, is probably the greatest theologian the United States has ever produced, and he has shelves of books, and he's determined the direction of theology in this country for a long time. Anyway, so she was there, and at the same time, my roommate introduced me to her, and we started courting one another. And kind of interesting, somebody was talking about the Washington Bridge. We walked to the other side of the Washington Bridge, and we exchanged our first kiss there on the other side of the Washington Bridge in New Jersey, and walked back again.
The story includes a conception part.
Yeah, I was going to say, this was a very fast courtship.
Well, Paul and George were before this.
At any rate, she was at the maternity center, and she was learning to be a midwife, and what she did, she did practice. She did, at one particular point, I'll get to the point of the story, which is this, but I'm starting right at the beginning. At any rate, this one particular delivery she had was, she used to live at 151st Street and with like 4 other young ladies, all of whom were within the medical profession, one way or the other. At any rate, she got this call past midnight, and so she phoned up a taxi to come and pick her up. And she said to the taxi driver, I have a delivery, and the taxi driver said, where? She said, in Harlem. So the taxi driver drove her to Harlem, and it's one of these 5 walk-ups apartment buildings. Anyway, the taxi driver gets there and says, lady, you're not going up there alone. So he locked the taxi and took Ruth up the 5 stories, and she delivered the baby. And I have a picture in my scrapbook of her the baby after it was delivered. At any rate, the point of all those stories is that Ruth was a nurse midwife, and after she graduated, she worked at Columbia Presbyterian, and she taught natural childbirth, and obviously anybody who wanted to be with, any husband wanted to be with their wives during the childbirth, they had to go through her classes, and so sometimes she had doctors there and other people in order to be able to be with their wives during the childbirth experience. At any rate, I think Ruth had a fairly romantic idea of what childbirth was like. I'm getting to the story. At any rate, the first birth was with Paul. When we left the States, Ruth was pregnant, and I'll get to the story. Let me tell you the inconvenience ones. At any rate, when we got to England, Ruth was like 4 or 5 months pregnant, and my mother had sent over £50 so we could rent a car. So we rented a small car to drive to the east coast through Wales up to Scotland. At any rate, we wanted to go to Scotland because Ruth, all the time she was growing up, she had heard about this little village of Auchenairin, where her family had come from, and it was a sweet little village, and there was a churchyard, and how her grandmother, or great-grandmother Gordon, her grandmother, I guess, had gone to church there, and how it was a whole day affair, and they went for church, and then lunch after church in the afternoon and the evening. Anyway, so we wanted to go and see the graveyard in Auchenairin. But anyway, we got to Glasgow on a Saturday night, and Glasgow had had too much to drink, and it was reeling round and round and round, and the place was just mad. Anyway, so we finally stopped the guy and said, "Where's Auchenairin?" Well, apparently Glasgow had spread so much that Auchenairin had just been devoured and was gone. So, at any rate, we decided that we wouldn't find a lodging in Glasgow that night, so we headed east towards Edinburgh. At any rate, after about 2 hours of driving, we decided it was too tired, and we just had to sleep. At any rate, it was a small car. It was not quite like a Mini Minor, but it was a pretty small car. And of course, Ruth being Scottish and me being of English descent, we'd always had this kind of rivalry between the English and the Scots. At any rate, we pulled over into this field and slept there the night, and Ruth went in the back seat, I was in the front seat. Anyway, we wake up the next morning, and what do we see? This was the field of the Battle of Bannockburn, where the English had defeated the Scots. Anyway, so Ruth had a kind of romantic idea of what childbirth was going to be about. And when Paul was due, she went to the Lady Chancellor Hospital, which was a maternity hospital in Salisbury, Southern Rhodesia. She was there, and she always had very long labours. With Paul, it was like 3 days. So it was a long, procrastinated labour.
He's a tall guy.
She didn't want to get rid of you, Paul. At any rate, unfortunately, as you ladies probably know, you want to go to the bathroom from time to time when you have a lot of other things inside you, taking up all that room. So she kept going to the bathroom, and the nurse on duty, the midwife on duty, said, "Look, if you get up again, I'm going to lock the door so you can't go out." And of course, Ruth was just absolutely broken-hearted, and this person was really cruel. Anyway, that for Ruth's first child, I mean, that's what always lingered in her mind. Anyway, she found out later that this young lady who was the nurse midwife or the nurse on duty, her husband had just run away with another woman, and she had 3 kids. She was left with 3 kids, completely upset, and Ruth took the burden of that. So that was for number 1. In George, so the second birth, she didn't want to go to the hospital, so she didn't go to the hospital, so George was born at home. So we had to go through all the preparation of making sheets, so we got old sheets and newspaper and padding, so we could keep all the ooky stuff away. But I always remember that I had to go in the backyard, backyard and dig up under the banana tree and bury the placentas.
You got roots at that house.
You know that about yourself, George?
You got genetic material.
So I want to go find that. Right.
At any rate, when it came for Lynn to be born, we were in another town called Cobway, which was now called Cobway, but then called Broken Hill. And the reason it's called Broken Hill is because the geological formations are exactly the same as the geological formations in Broken Hill, Australia. So it's called Broken Hill now because of independence. It's called Cobway. Anyway, that's where the Broken Hill Man was found. It was one of the oldest pre-Homo sapiens found there, called the Broken Hill Man. Anyway, now to get to the story.
And what country are you in?
We're in
Zambia.
We're now in Zambia. When we went there, it was northern Rhodesia. now it's Zambia because they got independence in 1964. So now Lynn is about to be one of the first white babies ever born. At any rate, Ruth was 40 when Lynn was produced. At any rate, so she went to the local doctor in Broken Hill, and he was, I say, an old guy, and here I am 15 years older. He was probably near 70, and Ruth went to him once and he said, I'm not going to him again. So she never had any prenatal kind of checking up the whole time. It came time for her to deliver, so there was a hospital there. So she went to the hospital and she was on the delivery table, but the back window was open and the curtains were open and there was a tropical storm going on and the rain was pouring in on her. So Ruth said, look, if you just shut that window, I'll produce the baby. So,
She's so funny.
so they shut the window and Ruth produced Lynn. At any rate, during Lynn's coming out, she caused a tear, so the nurse midwives, the doctor wasn't there, the nurse midwives weren't there. So Lynn said, why did you call the doctor to help? He only gets in the way, we never call him. Anyway, since she had a surgical procedure, she had to get sewed up. The doctor was called to sew her up, so that was kind of...
And what time of the day was that?
That was in the evening. It was a tropical storm going on. It was dark. It was midnight, not midnight, but 8 or 9 at night.
And what about her being carried in the basket?
Right, so when we left to come to this country,
I like that stories. I know them all.
well, basically we were in northern Rhodesia, and anyway, I had worked for the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, and that was 3 countries together, northern Rhodesia, southern Rhodesia, and Nyasaland were federated together in a federation. And in the federation, white education was right throughout the 3, and it was uniform. It doesn't matter what school you taught in, you get the salary of whatever other school you taught in, and black education was separate. So I was teaching in the education department there, and it was right by the Congo border. We were in a town called Mufulera, was 12 miles from the Congo border, and once we went across the Congo border and they drove on the other side of the street, and we wondered why everybody was on the wrong side of the street. Anyway, so the Federation broke up in the end of 1963, and on the day that Kennedy was shot on December the 22nd, 1963, I picked up the paper and read Kennedy being shot, and I told Ruth, of course she was upset, being an American. Anyway, that day I went to the capital city, Lusaka, and I knew the Federation was coming to an end. Well, I was on the 3-year Federation was coming to an end, and I'd be without a job in December, because that's when the school year ended. At any rate, the mining companies, the copper mining companies, the Anglo-American, which were vastly rich, they knew independence was coming, so they wanted a crash program of education. So they set up 5 secondary schools, 3 teacher training colleges, and 10 grade schools. And they got most of their recruits from England and Scotland, and some from South Africa. But I wasn't from England or Scotland, from South Africa. But I went to see the head of the trust, and I said, can you employ a math and physics teacher? Have you got an opening? And he said, yes. And so I said, go, you sign me on. So that was a 3-year contract to sign on. But I said, I want the same conditions of service that all your other employees have, which meant free passage to Scotland. I wasn't from Scotland, but that's what I asked for. And I'm getting to America now. At any rate, so I started to work for the Northern Rhodesia Educational Trust in the town of Kabwe, or Broken Hill. And then what happened, they got independence, they took over the schools, our contracts were broken, so if we wanted to fill our contract we had to go to one school, and I decided, I'm leaving, I'm going to America. So that's how we decided to go to America. At any rate, we were way up there in the boonies, and we got a little baby that was born in February, and here it was May, and how do you take a little baby along with you? So you get an apple box, and you reinforce the apple box, and you put the baby in the apple box. So we went by train 2 days to Southern Rhodesia to my parents, and we stayed there a week or two, and then 3 days and 3 nights by train to South Africa, and then the boat to England, and the boat to the United States. And we landed in the United States on June the 6th. It'll be 50 years on June the 6th. So that's where the apple box came from. So Lynn started her life in an apple box.
What about the
I like
naming?
apples.
What's that?
The naming ceremony.
Naming.
Didn't you have a naming ceremony? Oh, gee.
Another tribe.
Oh, at Broken Hill, wasn't there something?
No, I don't think so. I was there on the boat. Wasn't that when
Oh, that's crossing the line.
Oh, crossing the board, the equator?
Yeah, you went all blue.
Yeah, one thing I was going
Oh,
to
yeah.
Hang you by your feet.
For those who are in the medical field here, we nearly lost Lynn and we nearly lost George 3 times. We're on the boat in Cape Town. Lynn had developed a bronchial infection, and every time she's fed the milk, she'd bring it up, she'd bring a lot of phlegm with it, and she'd choke and she couldn't breathe. So once we left Southern Rhodesia, that became apparent. So Ruth had to have Lynn right next to her all the time in the bunk on the train. At any rate, when we got to Cape Town, there were friends of ours who came to say goodbye to us, and Paul and George were in bed, and Lynn was in bed. We put them to bed and we went up on deck to say goodbye to our friends, and we came down, and Lynn was blue. She'd stopped breathing. And luckily, my wife had medical training. I wouldn't have known what to do. Lynn's blue. So my wife quickly grabbed her, turned her upside down, and gave her a whack on the back. And she started to cry, and she came to. So that was touch and go.
Wow.
And here you are.
Yay!
No wonder you're
so
happy.
happy. It's a miracle.